Well, Shabbat Shalom and welcome. This is VBS Torah Study for Shabbos, and I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein. And again, I'm sorry, but I'm by myself because all of my compatriots are out taking care of the Jewish people this week. It's been a very exciting week. A tremendous election in America with all kinds of implications for our future, and in Israel, an upheaval, and a almost a pogrom, a riot in Amsterdam yesterday against Jewish patrons of a soccer team. And so, we finished this week with a certain kind of unsteadiness, a sort of unsettled shakiness, wondering what the future bodes for us all. But let's turn for a moment from the contemporary world to the bigger picture, which is reflected in this week's Torah portion. We're in Lech Lecha, the third Torah portion of the book of Genesis. And this Torah portion bids us to look at Torah in a very different way than we usually look at it. Usually, when we study Torah on the micro level. We look at one sentence, one phrase, a verse, maybe one law, if at most one narrative, one sort of story. But today I'd like to take a look at the sort of bigger sweep, the narrative arc of the Torah, because I think there's something very important going on here. So we look at the narrative sweeps of Genesis, of the book we're in, and of the Torah even more so. And what we find here is a drama in three acts. Act one, we're introduced to a character named God. Now, what's important is when you're reading Torah is to forget everything you know about God, or everything you think you know about God, everything we were taught about God. All of those things come later. Those are philosophical principles that were applied to religion at a later date from other sources, namely Greek philosophy and rational philosophy of European Enlightenment. But if you just read the story, just open the story. First of all, the Torah is completely unself-conscious about jumping right into the story, and in particular, introducing us to this character named God. And we know only two things about this character God from those opening chapters of Genesis. Number one, that this is a God who creates. That's what God's doing in the beginning, creating. And number two, if you follow the narrative and read subtly, you'll discover that this is a God who dreams. And the dream of this God is a world of oneness. Now, this idea of oneness, of unity, of wholeness, of peace, shalom in Hebrew means wholeness and it means peace. Shalom, a world of wholeness. And we know this because this is a God who creates, but the creating mechanism is simply speech acts, words, yehi or. It's even the mystical tradition imagined, because it saw that word yehi, meaning let there be, but let there be is too complicated. Yehi is one word and there's no consonants. It's breathing reality into being. This is a God who emanates reality. Now, there's no material to get in the way. When I bake a challah on a Friday afternoon, I try. There's always a contest between me and the challah. I want this to be a challah, and the challah wants to be a blob. The material of my creation pushes back against my will. Same thing happens, by the way, if you raise children. If you ever have a 2-year-old in your life who turns to you and says, no, that's what you know. And if you have a 16-year-old, God help you. The material of creation pushes back against the creative urge to form it and to shape it. But not so in God's world. In God's world, there is no material of creation. It's all created by God. And so there is an essential oneness between God and God's creation. And then that creation flowers into all of the aspects of reality that we understand, and they're all symbiotic. What's really beautiful is that the image of creation in the first chapters of Genesis is a garden. You ever think about why a garden? Because a garden why not a city or a fortress or a palace but a garden is this beautiful, beautiful image of the artifice and nature coming together as one. And in a garden, everything is symbiotic, both aesthetically and biologically. Everything nurtures everything else. Bugs and plants get along with each other, and they nurture each other's growth and prosperity. Animals as well. They nurture what's there. And so the garden is an image of the essential oneness of ecology, the environmental oneness in which the human being is placed. And of course, the human being is created. And in each of the two stories, first chapter and second chapter of Genesis, there is essential oneness there. In the first chapter, human beings are created, b'tselem, in the image of God. Everything else is just created by God, but the image of God is the model for human beings. And so there's an essential oneness between God and us. In the second story, it's even more vivid because in the second story, God gathers up schmutz. God gathers up dirt of the earth. The Hebrew word for dirt is adamah, and the Hebrew word for human being is Adam. We are one with the natural world. We are of the natural world. We are natural organic creatures. And then there's one thing that makes us different than everything else in the natural world. God breathes into this lump of clay, Ruach Elohim, the breath of Ruach, the Ruach, the Ruach, the wind, the Spirit of God. We breathe God. God is in us all the time as we are living in the world. And so there is an essential oneness then between God and creation, between God and the human being, a oneness within the biology of creation. And then finally, human beings are created as one. And so in the first story, the Genesis 1, male and female created together. There's essential oneness between male and female, between all who occupy the world as human beings. In the second story, man is created first and woman is taken from his rib, which means that we are one there as well. This essential oneness is God's plan and God's dream. And the wonderful thing is that at the end of the story, God takes a walk in the garden, having said everything is good, and finally finishing creation. God says everything is very good. God takes a walk. There's a wonderful Yiddish word. He kvells. He takes joy in the creation God has created, and God enjoys that creation, the oneness that God has created. That was the plan. And the human being was created, b'tselem, in the image of God. In the first story, the human being is created to be responsible for the world, to rule it, to have dominion over it, to organize it, to manage it. In the second story, man is put into the Garden of Eden, l'shamra u'le'avda, to nurture it, to cultivate it, and to protect it. That's why we're here. We are part of the plan of God's oneness, and our responsibility specifically is to protect this creation. But then what happens? There is one act that we're forbidden, and that's eating that fruit. But it's a story. It's interesting that human individuality is portrayed in the Bible as transgressive. It's a rebellion because we are created in the image of the Creator, and therefore we wish to create. And what's the most important creation that any of us can create? We create ourselves. We are not meant to be carbon copies, Xerox copies of our parents. We are meant to be individuals, each of us meant to bring something unique and precious into the world. And so the human being says, I know you want me to live in this paradise passively, but I refuse to do that. I will create myself. And eating of the fruit is a source of wisdom to know the difference between good and evil, between light and dark, between life and death. And it brings individuality into the world. But individuality comes with penalties. The first and most awful penalty is that male and female are now separate. Each of us as human individuals are separate, and we are not bonded to each other in the intimate bond that we started out with. We spend a lifetime trying to understand each other. Those of us who have been married a while know what that's like, loving the other with all our heart and soul and might, and yet some days wondering, who are you? And who am I? And what are we doing here? That bond is broken. And the bond between human beings and nature is broken because we are individuals and therefore we face nature no longer as part of nature, but we are now facing nature. And the bond between human beings and God is broken because we have disobeyed and broken God's dream. And God sends us out of the garden, and their individuality goes wild. That is to say, individuation, our desire to be ourselves. But the question is, if I'm me, then who are you? And what are my obligations, responsibilities, and what are the limits on my individuation living with you? And human beings fill the world with violence, which is the sense that individuation overcomes any sense of solidarity and responsibility, and we're at each other's throats, and we are violent in this world because we want my way. It's like every 2-year-old who pushes you out of the way, doesn't want to share the toy, doesn't want to share the space, wants to tell you how he or she wants it. And that's not the way you run a society. It's not the way you can build human community. Human community is built on something much more subtle. And God says, this is wrong. This is broken. I'm going to destroy it all. It's been a failure. At the end of the first Torah portion, the end of Act 1 of our story, God's dreams are shattered and God decides to destroy it all. And sometimes when I bake something, I like to bake and I'll make a mistake. I've swapped out salt for sugar. I forgot the yeast didn't come up. The yeast didn't live. It died somewhere, and the challah comes out flat like a cracker. And what you do with those points is like you throw it out, put it at the bottom of the rubbish, and therefore no one knows you ever did it. And God says, I'm going to destroy this. And just before he destroys it, his eye catches one human being, one man who has moral potential, and that's Noah. And God reasons, I couldn't create a partner to share my dream of oneness. Maybe I can choose one. I'll choose him. He seems to have potential. And God wipes out all life on the planet except for Noah and the animals he puts in his ark. And God says, come out of the ark now and repopulate the world in your image, in the image of a man with moral conscience, with a man who understands that individuation, our own desires and impulses, the ego, has to be delimited by a sense of responsibility, a sense of care. In fact, the ego has to understand that the most powerful satisfactions of life are not what we get, but what we give, the care we share with each other, the love we share with each other. It's what I always tell the kids when I tell them stories, that there is a class of realities that you cannot hold except if you give it away, like a hug, like love, like a great story, like wisdom. These can only be possessed by giving them away. And Noah understands this, except having been traumatized, watching the destruction of the world around him, he loses his mind. And God once again says, Oi, look at this. And the descendants of Noah, they didn't inherit his goodness, because goodness, morality is not genetic. It's something that we carry in our souls, not in our genes. And when God sees the world once again filled with violence and brokenness, he has made a promise. God made a promise not to destroy it. But there is a sense of failure. I couldn't create a human being to share my vision. I couldn't choose one to share my vision. I can't destroy it anymore. I promised not to do that. Maybe now I can teach a human being. And so God begins a process in this Torah portion of engendering a human community that will embody and will represent and will advocate for the divine dream of a world of oneness. And that's Abraham. Now, the midrash of the tradition understood that there was a backstory that the Bible forgot to tell us about how Abraham got to be Abraham. We all learned this in Hebrew school, the story of the idols and other great stories. But I have news for you. There's no reason. The Bible doesn't tell us why God chose Abram. It just says he chose Abram. My suspicion is he chose him because his name started with an A. If his name had been Zachary, he'd been at the end of the line. Because I don't think I don't think the story is that this man was a spiritual genius. That's the Noah story. I think God chose him randomly, honestly. And I think God said, can I change a man? Can I change him into my representative on earth? Can I change him into a vessel of divinity and blessing in the world? Can I teach him? And so the Torah portion starts out, Lech lecha me'artzecha me'eretz moladetcha. I want you to leave home. I want you to leave the background you came from, the culture that taught you. I want you to leave all of the markers of your identity at home, and I want you to follow me to a new land. I want you to become a new man, a new human being. I'm going to recreate you, but not physically. I'm going to recreate you morally by taking you out of the culture that has taught you and bringing you to a place. And I'm going to make you great, and I'm going to make your name great, and you will be the father of many nations. That's what that's what it's in it for you. And I only ask you one thing, says God. Heye bracha. Be a blessing. And then, in order to make it clear, God says to him, I will bless those who bless you, which is nice. And I will curse those who curse you, which is better. And then, v'nivrachu b'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. I think that's remarkable. Because what's important about that is that God doesn't say what you think God is going to say. God doesn't say, be a blessing to me. God doesn't say to Abraham, obey me. God says, no, I want you to embrace my dream of oneness, go into the world and teach the world that, and teach the world how to be blessings to each other, how to be a blessing. I know what it means to say a blessing. Anybody in your life who you'd say is a blessing? Anybody blessing? You ever tell a story like that? If I ask you who's your blessing and you say, oh, when I was in college, when I was in school, when I was growing up, when I started my life, there was this person who was there for me to mentor me and lift me up and inspire me. Or when I was at the most low point of my life with pain and suffering and despair, this person lifted me up. Or there's someone whose confidence in me has sustained me through my life and my journey in life and given me resilience to meet my world. Be a blessing, says God to Abraham. Be a blessing. I say this to bar mitzvah kids because too many of these kids have heard from the time that they were young that they have to go to Stanford and that's what makes them worthy of love. And I say, not here. Maybe that's the way in your school. Maybe that's even in the way in your home, although I certainly hope not. But here in synagogue, we only measure you by one standard. Are you a blessing to someone? Are you a blessing to the world? Are you a vessel of divine blessing? And that's only done through character and through moral vision and through moral imagination and through moral action. That's what makes you a success in the four walls of the synagogue. And that's a contrast to the culture out there. I don't care what you look like. I don't care the clothes you're wearing or the makeup you put on. I don't even care how much money you make. I just hope that somewhere in the world, when your name is blessed, when your name is mentioned, somebody says, ah, she is my blessing. He is my blessing. That's how I'll know you're a success. That's what it defines success here in the walls of the synagogue, in this place of Torah. I think it's so very important. This statement that God makes to Abraham, you will be great and all the world will know who you are, and you will be a blessing. It is at one time the greatest expression of Jewish particularism, that is, we are chosen. We really are. And Jewish universalism. We are chosen to be a blessing to the world. And so both of those things must be held on to. You can't separate them. Any attempt to separate them which goes on all through Jewish history. Any attempt to separate them violates the essence of what it means to be Jewish. If you say, listen, the world out there has its own problems, but I'm going to take care of my own. I'm only concerned with the Jewish people. I'm only concerned with my own. I'm only going to give charity to my own. I'm only going to vote for my own. I'm only going to care for my own. I'm only going to look out for my own. Then you violated the commandment to Abraham to be a blessing to the world. And on the other hand, if you say, my commitment is to the cosmopolitan universe and not to the narrow chauvinism and nationalism of Jewishness, which is too small for my spirit, you've also violated the essence of being Jewish. Because the essence of being Jewish recognizes that the way that we are a blessing to the world is by being faithful to our own people. I know how much I owe my non-Jewish neighbor because I know how much I love my own people and I realize how much he or she loves their people. I celebrate my neighbor's rituals. This year, Christmas is coming really early. It started 2 weeks before Halloween. But I recognize how important Christmas is to my Christian neighbors because I know how important Pesach is to me. And I see how much joy my Christian neighbor takes in decorating his home and putting up a tree because I know how much joy I take in decorating our sukkah. My commitment and faithfulness to my particularity opens a door to understand my commitment to the universal truth that we are all one humanity. Because we aren't just one humanity, we are one humanity made up of particular families and particular cultures and particular ways of being, particular faiths. And the way that I honor that particularism is by honoring my own. That's the great insight of you will be a blessing. That's the wonderful insight of you will be a blessing. And the other thing, of course, is that if you read world mythologies, this story should be familiar to you. If you've ever listened to Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, he had written some wonderful, wonderful books in his famous series on PBS with Bill Moyers. And Campbell points out that every culture has this story. Every ancient mythology, Babylonian mythology certainly has it, but so does Greek mythology. For that matter, so does Navajo mythology and Aboriginal mythology in Australia. Every culture in the world has a story where the god comes to a human being and says, be my hero, be my warrior, and together you and I will conquer the world. And everything God says to Abraham, you can find in all these other world mythologies. When God says, I will make your name great. Yeah, all the other gods say that. And I will make you great. And all the other gods say that. And you will be the ruler or the father of many nations. All the other gods say that, but only one world mythology, only ours, says the next line. You're not to conquer. You're not to conquer and rule and dominate humanity. Hayeh bracha, be a blessing. Be a blessing to the families of the earth. Recognize their particularity. Support and protect them, just as you support and protect your own. Be a blessing is the meaning of our being in the world. That's our mandate. That's the charter of Jewish life. And so this week we have Act 3. And the rest of the Torah, in fact, I would say the rest of Jewish history, is a playing out of Act 3. Can we learn how to be a blessing? Can we learn how to see the other as a possible brother and sister instead of an adversary and an enemy? Can we find a way to bring shalom, to bring wholeness, to bring peace to the world? Be a blessing, says God. Be a blessing. And then we have all of the rest of the Torah to figure out. The contest, it's a contest, it's a struggle between the impulses of the ego to be me and God's demand, God's command, God's mandate to be a blessing, to be outward, to care for the world, to make the world whole. That construct, that conflict, that struggle is exactly what the rest of the Torah is going to be about. It's what the rest of history is going to be about. This week has been a very hard week. You know, there are people that cheer this election, and God bless them. I hope they're right. And there are people who dread what's coming. And I hope it's not that bad. And I hope we can find solidarity in the presence of the things that we might find difficult. And the kinds of upheavals in Israel make us worry deeply about its future and its security and safety. And this anti Semitic pogrom in Europe. This is the anniversary of Kristallnacht, this Shabbat. This weekend is Kristallnacht from 1938. And the idea that once upon a time the world went to war against the Jewish people. The world went to war against the Jewish people, and we pray that the world has learned its lesson and not to do that to us or to anyone again, that we all can be blessings to each other. Let's pray that this Shabbat brings us peace. Let's pray that this Shabbat brings us vision. Let's pray that this Shabbat brings us blessings. Thank you for listening, and take good care this Shabbos. Stay well. Lech lecha. Go into the world and be a blessing.